good enough, guys? Cool. Alright, so yeah, like I said, if I start talking, I'll just start talking, and then might as well just start talking. So my name is Derek Bros, and I am, as I was saying a moment ago, I'm a freelance investigative journalist, self-taught, didn't go to school for journalism, activist for the last 9 or 10 years, based in Houston, Texas, which is where I'm coming from this weekend. And I have a radio show. I've lived in 3 different community houses. I started this activist community called the Houston Freethinkers back in 2010, and we've collaborated and worked with all kinds of activist groups around the country. And basically, over time, found myself involved in the independent media and alternative media, working for a lot of big, what started out as Facebook pages, and then evolved to real, legitimate, journalistic outlets with teams of writers and editors and things like that, and have just made this. You could say a living, but more of a way of life. It's just what I do. I don't know how to stop, really. I have a YouTube channel. I've got a website. I'm constantly putting out new interviews with interesting, inspiring people who are working on solutions. I've started to focus on documentary film work. So in a typical week, I'm putting out 4 to 5 articles, 4 to 5 videos, a live show podcast, a documentary once a month, working on all kinds of projects. It's just kind of what I do. And 90% of those things don't pay anything, but they're just, I don't really know what else to do at this point in my life. I'm 34 years old. I've been doing this now for a decade, and it's the only thing that feels rewarding in the ways that it does, and it pays off in other ways. I'm not sitting here trying to, give me a sob story because I'm not getting paid millions of dollars. I'd rather do what I do now than anything else because I have the freedom of time to do whatever the heck I want every day, and I just choose to spend my time in this way, right? So the talk today that they chose, so the way it works is when you apply, they ask you to give them 3 or 4 ideas, and they choose one. But I'm going to talk about the same thing regardless, so it's just kind of a placeholder. But the title is The Importance of Censorship-Free Conscious Media. So if you came here to hear about censorship, you're in the wrong. I'm not pro-censorship. It's not pro-censorship. I had somebody listen to censorship. Yeah, we should. I'm like, no. But so I will be touching on some of that, but that's going to be more of a starting point for what I call holistic activism. And if you heard me in the panels the past 2 days, I've had an opportunity to kind of touch on some of these ideas, and so we'll go a little bit deeper with that. But before we do that, before I get into telling you guys a little bit more about my activism and journalism work and how that relates to censorship, we're going to talk about technology, different tools that we can use to get away from these systems, because in my belief, in my perspective, what I'm seeing here is that people come to these kinds of events because they're looking for something outside of the mainstream world, right? You're not just going to your typical Budweiser-sponsored festival, you're coming to look for a different experience. However, oftentimes people looking for a different experience are still using the same mainstream search engines, mainstream emails, mainstream social medias, all these things tracking, tracing you, manipulating essentially your version of reality because they create a funnel. We'll talk about that. And so yeah, just encouraging people to look at alternatives. That's essentially the gist of my message, is localization and decentralization. But before we get into all that, I'll give you guys a little bit more background. So as I said, I'm 34 years old right now. I started the Freethinkers in 2004, and then after a couple of years, started to get opportunities to, excuse me, not 2004. I'm totally missing timelines here. 2010, and then after a couple of years, had some folks come up to me and say, we can pay you to do what you're doing. I was already blogging and writing and going out and kind of doing just independent investigative journalism in my city, going to city council and just asking questions that I realized nobody's paying attention to these things in our backyard. And then some opportunities came to start getting paid a little bit for it, and so I've been doing that, and along the way I've written 4 books. I have a 5th one coming out next month, and get invited to speak at conferences like this, and it's very wonderful. But the beginning of my journey actually happened before I ever became aware of sort of the political nature of things. 14 years ago I was addicted to crystal meth. And when I was 20 years old, I got arrested and I went to prison about a week before I turned 21. And that was a few years after I got out of high school. So getting out of high school was a few months being the drunk guy at every party, puking all over the place. 6 months or so on Xanax all the time, blacking out. 6 months or so of being, rolling balls on ecstasy all the time till I couldn't even feel any emotion. I kind of became a zombie. And then eventually trying crystal, and then within 10 months of trying crystal, I was homeless. I was lost everything I had pretty much, and then ended up locked up. And when I got locked up, it was definitely a very good gut check of yo, what the fuck am I doing? How did this happen? And especially for me, on both sides of my family, there is a very heavy, prevalent energy. The males have struggled with drug addiction and depression and suicide going back at least 3 generations. My great-grandfather on my father's side, he hung himself in prison. My grandfather was, he had my birth father at a very young age, and he got into drugs. My birth father was, selling drugs and using drugs by the time he was 10 years old. So by the time I came around, it was just sort of the family tradition, I guess you could say. And when I got locked up, I was very, like I said, I had a moment of self-reflection of like, what the fuck am I gonna, especially when I realized, like, I'm looking at the calendar and it's like, you're not going home for at least a year. There's nothing I can't call my mom, my girlfriend, all the typical, typically I think in situations, no matter how old you are, if you're like in some major jam, you figure you can call mom or dad or somebody can like come get you out of this. But very few of us, I think, in life experience those situations where you're completely powerless, where nobody can come, your mom can come beat on that door and tell them to let you out of prison, or your lawyer can do whatever, but you're not going anywhere, right? And so that was a really big gut check, and I kind of decided, like, all right, I'm gonna be here till next September at the least, and I should probably use this time for something, and so I started to do journaling a lot, just really kind of asking myself how I got in that position. It was also a real kick in the nuts because I spent my early years very angry at my birth father. My earliest memories are visiting him in prison, going to visit him in prison, and kind of integrating that as a young child, trying to understand, like, why do we have to go see him behind razor wire? How come I only get to see him for 2 hours? Why has he got a black eye? How come he writes letters and makes these promises and then doesn't come home? And that I put all that on my shoulders. And so once I got locked up and started to look back, I could see that I've been depressed most of my life. Like the first 20 years of my life, I tried to kill myself 3 times before I was 15 years old, and that was way before I ever touched drugs. Once I found drugs, it was like, oh, this is what I was looking for. This is the happiness that I've been craving and seeking. This is where joy and love is found, right? Obviously, I realized that wasn't the answer, but that was the path that I took. And so when I got locked up and I'm in prison, kind of looking backwards, and even more so now here 14 years later, I could very clearly see that, like, the source of my trauma and the source of my self-medication, which is what my drug use, crystal meth, ecstasy, alcohol, whatever, was all related to this trauma, right? And not to put the blame on him, because he had his own trauma. Like I said, I can see now there's like 3 or 4 generations going back on both the, my dad's side and my mom's side that have alcohol problems, drug addiction, in prison, and like I just, I kind of became the latest one, but I was super determined to stop the cycle, break the cycle, as they say, or at least to try to understand it, and like, why the hell how did I get here, right? And so when I was locked up, I just started journaling every day. There was one day, you have access to the newspaper when you're locked up, and in the Houston paper, the Houston Chronicle, there's a section, the religious section, and they usually quote from different traditions. They have like a quote from the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, and they had a quote from what is sometimes known as the Buddhist Bible, the Dhammapada. And it was, I don't remember which verse it was, but it was some verse that just immediately struck me, and it was like, wow, holy shit, I need to know. I kind of vaguely knew about Buddhism and different types of meditation, but never on a serious level. But after that, once I read that, I started to get my grandmother and my girlfriend at the time to just send me, they would print out a chapter of the Dhammapada a day and just mail it to me. And my grandma started sending me books on Zen Buddhism and meditation, and so I started meditating while I was locked up. And it also contributed to that self-reflective state of just, really, I think journaling saved my life, because I was able to just sit there and just kind of observe and just write. And I honestly think that prison is probably the perfect place for a practice like meditation. At the time, I didn't really know that there were meditation programs in prison. There wasn't as many in the early 2000s, but it's definitely becoming more of a common thing in some prisons where they're opening up to this, and the effects are amazing. But the reason I say it's probably the perfect place for it is because you're surrounded by a lot of ego, a lot of fear. You're the same color as me, so we'll all hang out together. And I have people come up to me. I'm of mixed ethnicity, native and native to Texas and Seminole and just a couple other things in there. So I kind of feel like I don't really fit in any of these groups. But I was hanging out with the Hispanic crowd, and then they come and tell me, hey, you can't be hanging out with that black guy. You can't be. And I'm like, hey, I'm not involved in any kind of gang politics here. Like, I'm just here to do my time. Like, keep me out of that shit. Like, that's it. But that's the mentality that's going on there. And it does come from what I consider to be a very low-level, primitive way of thinking. And it's because there's a lot of fear. There's all that ego. It's like everybody wants to put on a macho facade and pretend like they're the badass and in the block, but everybody's really broken in some way. And there's so many brilliant people I met in there. Some of the folks that I met figured shit out before I did, and they never went back. Others are dead. Others I know are still cycling in and out of that prison system. I ended up doing 18 months between 2005 and 2008. I did a year, got out for about 5 months, went back for another 3, got out for a year, and then went back for another 4. So I ended up with a felony. I got out October 2008 for the final time on parole, and then finished parole the following summer. And it was in that space that after going through this kind of back and forth and really digging in deep, like I need to get the answers that are for myself, like try to, break the cycle. The first time I got locked up, I was like, well, it's all my dad's fault. I just need to, write him a bunch of letters and tell him this is your fucking fault. Well, this is why, you're the problem that I'm here. And of course he rejected that and was like, you need to figure your own shit out, which I was very upset about at first, but now I understand was the right answer, because he was hurt by his own traumas and still dealing with it. And unfortunately, he was never able to recover from his traumas. He died of a drug overdose last summer. And, so it's been something that's very, prevalent in my life and my family, watching people come in and out of prison, and some people figuring it out and moving on, and others not so much. So when I got out, I felt like I was... So I'm 34 years old right now. I honestly feel like I'm about 9 years old, because I feel like the first 20, 21 years of my life were really buried under this cloud of, depression, suicide attempts, drugs, and all that. And then when I got out after that October 2008, it was like this rediscovery of not only my own intelligence and my thirst for knowledge and for learning and for caring about the world, but also just walking. I got out as a felon, so I get a whole new set of judgments that come along with that. You can't have a job here, you can't rent here. There's a lot of perceptions that go along with that, even though because of the drug war, so many people have been touched and are, felons, or at least have, been in trouble with the law in some form or another. But I got out with that new experience. And so I was going to the library every day, trying to apply for jobs. The first job I got was some shit job that took 2.5 hours of buses just to get the other side of town to get a 3 or 4 hour shift, then 2 hours back. But it was all I could do, and it was either get a job or we'll send you back to prison. Those systems are definitely not set up to help you. And also I want to make it clear that I don't credit prison at all for my transformation or for the things that I've done, because as I said, there's a lot of folks who are still cycling in and out. It has to come from a personal place. Like I said, my father, he died at 54 years old after spending, 3/4 of his life in and out of those institutions. He didn't get the healing that he needed. What I needed at the time when I was going through that wasn't to be locked in a cage. I needed somebody to fucking talk to, because I didn't know how to process all the stuff I was going to. And it was only because, I found my creator and a space to go inside to do that. And it's a continuing journey. But so, I went into that space very depressed. To come out, this cloud's lifting. I remember I like to learn. I remember that I enjoy life. We're actually maybe discovering it for the first time, because like I said, most of my memories are not very happy at an early age. And I remember coming home from that shit job, and some days there was this big open field, and some days I would just you know what? I don't have anywhere to go right now. I'm just gonna go take a nap and lay in this field and just fucking lay here and just enjoy the sunset, and just things like that I would have never done before. In fact, that I would have been the kind of the guy that, look at that idiot, look at that hippie. I was always projecting outwards because I was so miserable inside. I couldn't stand to see other people happy, and I didn't have that awareness at the time, but now I can see back that's why I was so angry and frustrated. I didn't want to feel that, I didn't want to feel what was going on there. So this change in my whole life started to happen, and like I said, I was always applying for jobs, trying to get a better job, and I was at the library that just happened to be right near where I was staying, and so I would go up to the library every day and just put in applications. And one day I picked up a book called Cannabis: A History, and it's a really excellent book. It was the first book that I ever voluntarily took notes on the whole thing and just absorbed it. Namely because it's all about cannabis, obviously, but more specifically it's about the drug war at large and the whole history of cannabis, politically, in the United States, and how the origins of the drug war and the war against cannabis come from racism, money, and business trying to drive out hemp and things like that, right? So I'm reading this and I'm like, holy shit, like I said, I felt so inspired to take notes and just kind of reflect on it. And it was like, wow, these are not things I was taught in school at all. Why is this totally brand new to me? And that kind of began my diving down the rabbit hole, as you could say, of watching some documentaries, reading some books. And that was 2009. I started the Free Thinkers in 2010, and yada yada yada, everything else I shared. Here I am in 2019. But it all started with that, with getting locked up, with going to prison, recovering from drug addiction, and still trying to understand the root of my pain and my trauma. And I had high hopes that I would be able to get my birth father and his father to have a conversation. I'd only ever been in the same room with them one time in my life. All four of us, me, my older brother, my grandfather, and my birth father. And it was the most awkward thing in the world. I'm more authentic with you guys right now in this moment. When we were all together, it was like, oh, so what are we having for dinner? What's, we're like, can't even look at each other in the eyes, and I just, it made me so sad. And so my goal before my dad died, I was trying to see if I could get them to talk, because I knew that there was so much trauma still. There were so much things that were unsaid, right? And so I say all that to just share a little bit about my background, so that as I get, like I said, the journalism is kind of the start for the talk, but we're going to be talking about much bigger concepts. And so my drive to learn about the world, it came initially from this kind of my spiritual revelation and trying to get to know myself better, and then realizing, holy crap, I've been so lost in my own shit that I haven't been paying attention to what's going on in the world. And so my website is called The Conscious Resistance, my YouTube channel, and what I call holistic activism or holistic anarchism. And so when I say the conscious resistance, what I mean by that, it's the realization, the recognition, the awareness that the struggle for a more free, ethical, and just world is not going to come from only confronting the systems of power in the physical realm, from going out there and protesting Trump or whatever else that, your cause is. And it's also not only going to come from meditating all day and from, just working on self-care. There's a balance that needs to happen. And it needs to, I think bringing the two of those worlds together is absolutely important, and if not, we're missing a piece of the puzzle. So when I first got out, when I started the Houston Freethinkers, when I got out of prison and I started getting involved in activism, I started to notice this very stark contrast that I would, I had already started my meditation practice, so it was just a normal thing to me to be attracted to like consciousness events and meditation circles. So I would go to that, and then I would also be like, oh shit, there's a protest coming out, let me go get involved in that, or let me organize a protest or whatever. And I would be in the protest activist circles, and I would notice that if I mentioned to them like, hey guys, there's this meditation tonight, you guys want to come join? And they're like holding their sign on the street like, are you high? What are you talking about, man? Like, are you hippie? Something like that, right? I was like, okay. And then I'd go to my meditation circles, my consciousness groups, and I'd say, hey guys, did you see this latest police shooting, or do you see what they're doing with this pipeline, or whatever issue I was, on at that moment? And it was more like, don't talk about it, you're gonna manifest it, be quiet, just don't talk. And so for 2 years, the first 2 years of my activism, from 2010 to about 2012 or so, I just lived this two different worlds. I had my meditation circles, consciousness groups, and I had my activist friends, and I figured those were just separate worlds that would not be together. And in the summer of 2013, I just had like another kind of revelation. I couldn't sleep for a few days, and I was just up like watching videos and just thinking, and the phrase the conscious resistance came to me, and that's when I realized like I can't keep these sides, not only of myself, but just of this struggle separate, that I don't think that they are separate in any way. So yeah, and like I said, I started getting into journalism, and I was blessed to connect with a lot of really powerful activists from around the country, some here in California, just really dispersed all around the country, all around the world. And has anybody heard of the March Against Monsanto? Remember that? So a buddy of mine, his name's Nick Burnaby, he's the co-founder of March Against Monsanto. He also started a Facebook page, website that some of you may have heard of. It's called The Anti-Media. And so I started collaborating with a lot of these big Facebook pages that ended up having like 3 million, 4 million, 5 million plus followers, and where from 2013 till up until, I'd say, 2017, we could check the analytics of our websites and see that we were reaching hundreds of millions of people a week, and that we were beating CNN, we were beating Huffington Post, we were outpacing them at a level that we never would have imagined, just by using social media, just by being internet savvy, by being the generation that grew up knowing how to use the internet, right? And so it was this beautiful journey, and at one point, I was writing for 4 different websites. I had one outlet that, sent me to Standing Rock and sent me to Ferguson and sent me to different places so I could go do real frontline journalism from a non-mainstream perspective. And it was wonderful and it was beautiful, and I've been paid in crypto, like alternative currencies are definitely a part of my message. So that was, a very golden period from 2013 till about 2017 or so, or 2016. And then what happened, Trump got elected, and now I know a lot of people aren't a fan of Trump, I'm not either, but he really is not to blame for this. This is a kind of a more systemic problem that existed before he was even around. But when Trump got elected, what happened was there was this call for banning or censoring or protecting people's virgin eyes and ears from fake news, right? This idea that fake news spread, and that's what got Trump elected. And so this started to spread all over. The politicians started to say, YouTube, what are you going to do to stop fake news? Facebook, what are you going to do to stop fake news? Twitter, what are you going to do to stop fake news? Now, the whole thing, in my belief, and I think it's been proven true now, time has shown, that it was actually a targeting of independent thinkers, independent thought, and independent journalism. And another byproduct of this is, I realized that, so say I was to come to some Hillary Clinton supporter and say, hey, have you seen X, Y, and Z of what Hillary's up to? Yada, yada, yada. That's fake news, Russian propaganda. Shut down all critical thinking. go over to a Trump, supporter and say, hey, have you seen, look, he's dropping more bombs than Obama every day. He's, doing this and that. That's fake news, whatever, Democratic propaganda. It has allowed each of these different sides to further entrench themselves in their views, to shut down and to stop thinking, and just to call anything they don't agree with fake news. So that was one effect of it. But the ongoing effect has been the censorship of independent media. Most recently, in October 2018, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but there was what in our industry, in our community, we started to call the Facebook purge. And October 2018, just one day we woke up and there, it started to spread across the news that Facebook was deleting hundreds of pages that were promoting inauthentic content, is what they like to say. Or, well, let me back up a little bit. Once Trump got elected and once this fake news thing started to go around and people were saying, the Russians were spreading fake news, there was a Harvard professor that put up this Google document and it spread viral all over the internet. It got reported all by the mainstream and it was titled something like untrustworthy, misleading, and clickbaity websites. And every single one of us in the independent media had our websites listed on there, along with actual garbage websites like beforeitsnews.com and Your Newswire, websites that say like, hey, Lady Gaga announced she's a reptilian, or websites that are literally like garbage, actual, just, and maybe at the bottom they put like, this is satire, but their whole goal is to generate traffic to try to make money. So they listed our legitimate outlets who were out there, promoting anti-war stories, raising awareness about police violence, raising awareness about police and government and corporate corruption. We got listed, and that was the first kind of hit. From that list circulating, all of a sudden the advertisers were saying they didn't want to work with us anymore. And then there was another list that came out with this organization called Prop or Not, and I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but when you look into Prop or Not, they're tied to agencies that fund the U.S. military. So this is, there's a bigger picture going on than what was actually taking place. Again, Prop or Not lists every single website I write for, a number of my friends' websites, along with others. They kind of mix real websites with actual trash websites. And the results of that was that, and the results of course, Congress and all these people saying, Facebook, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Was they used their algorithm, which we're going to talk more about. They used their algorithm to tweak our traffic, and we lost 90% of traffic. So even if we were a page with 4 million followers, we're reaching, 100 people a post or something like that. Maybe, on our best day. We went from like hundreds of millions a week to hundreds a week, And so we were seeing this coming. We're like, man, we've got some really just awesome, brilliant people who know how to work the algorithm. So we were finding creative ways to like, okay, well, we got to use memes now. Let's post a meme because that goes more viral and put a link with it. We were trying all different techniques. But then fast forward to October 2018, and we wake up and some of the biggest pages and we're all like I said, we're all spread across the country, but after a while, like the circle is pretty small. There's maybe 100 or so of us spread around the world and the country who are working together. So some of us share access to each other's pages, using it like a social network, using the tool like to the best of our ability. And Facebook said that was inauthentic, coordinated behavior, that we were sharing. They tried to use this language that when you read it in the mainstream papers, it made it sound like we were doing something super deceptive, when it was basically like we're sharing each other's accounts to help promote and cross-promote each other's work. That's all it was. But that was enough for them to say like, hey, we're fighting fake news, and we took down 400 pages. They took down Press for Truth, is ran by this really awesome journalist named Dan Dix, who's in Canada. They took down the Anti-Media, we had 3 million followers. They took down the Free Thought Project, we had 4 million followers, focused on police accountability. Cop Block, obviously all about like police accountability. These pages had, we're reaching again hundreds of millions and sometimes upwards of that a week and a month and all that. So they went from soft censorship, using the algorithm to slowly limit our reach, to then just totally deleting our pages. And some of the pages had their YouTube accounts and their Twitter accounts taken down the same day. It was across cross-platform coordination. Although YouTube and Twitter never really released statements about it, Facebook did at least put a statement. They never mentioned us by name, but we could see like, hey, it's pretty obvious who they're targeting. They're targeting the people who are out here reaching people, that we were able to use this tool effectively to reach hundreds and millions of people and to make a network of people all around the world, and to help like folks in Syria, hey, you got a message you want to get out to the people of the world, we'll use our networks to broadcast it. And so, yeah, the last year, or just the last, what has it been, like 6-7 months, have been a big struggle. We one of the things I tried to do to figure out what the hell are we going to do, we hosted in Houston, we had a independent media summit in January, and it was about 50-60 people representing all kinds of different outlets, and we met in Houston for just like one full day of like, hey, this isn't a party, this isn't a festival, like let's just have a 10-hour brainstorming session of like, what can we do, how can we collaborate, how can we work together. And so we're still out here, we're still working on a lot of new ideas, but the problem is that the average person in the United States and abroad sees Facebook as the internet. Now, so I don't use Facebook for my personal account. I deleted it more than a year and a half ago. I had 25,000 followers on my personal page, and the Conscious Resistance page has another 40,000. I've left the Conscious Resistance page up, but we stopped using it as of January 1st, 2019, and I took down my page last year. And we're going to talk more about that, about why. But what I noticed when I was telling my supporters and followers and whatever you want to call them, like, hey guys, and I gave them 2 months warning, like, hey, on this date, I'm no longer posting. I'm going to keep making videos. I'm going to keep writing articles. I'm going to keep doing everything you've come used to me doing. I just won't be posting it on this one single platform. Here's a list of other places you can find me. Please don't leave. Please don't leave. Please, please. It was like pulling teeth to get people to just bookmark my website or check another website, because again, there is a filter bubble that exists because so many of us have become dependent on social media. Facebook owns Instagram, by the way. They also own WhatsApp. That for a lot of people, Facebook is the internet because they've made it super convenient. That's where you get your news. That's where you see what your friends are up to. That's where you see cat pictures. That's where you see food recipes or whatever, right? And that's never the way I used it. I always used it, if you were following my account, you were aware that you were going to be getting hit like daily posts of like, here's a new article, here's a new interview, here's a new video report, here's this, here's somebody else you should check out. That's what it was. That's the tool. That's the way I used it. But once they started censoring us and basically made it impossible to do that, it's like, not only do I not agree with the philosophy of the people behind it, not only are we aware that they track and trace all of our data, and that they, just like Google and Facebook are essentially data mining companies masquerading as search engines and social media networks. But what they actually do is gather data on you and then sell that for a profit to other people. That's how their business model works. That's how they're able to keep it free. And I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with that, but they're also extremely opaque about it. They don't tell us where that's going. And we found out through a few different scandals, like some of you guys may remember the Cambridge Analytica thing that happened a couple years ago. So my point here is that I started to recognize how not only the detrimental effect that Facebook was having on me, and again, the studies, there's been a dozen studies that come out since 2012, 2013. They studied people using the internet, like just the internet at large, and then people on Facebook and on Instagram. There's a big difference in the emotional response you get from just surfing the internet itself and between being on Facebook. The people who are on Facebook 10 to 12 hours a day, which I would include myself in that in the past, come away feeling depressed, envious, feelings of jealousy, feelings of wasted time, just this overall dissatisfaction. And for me, doing what I do, finding myself getting sucked into like political debates, and I'm like, arguing with somebody online, and then like maybe my partner comes up to me like, what do you want? Like, I'm taking that frustration, that stress out of that digital world and then carrying it with me. And think about this, how many times you might be like on the way to work, but you're just checking some social media thing and you see somebody posting something that just triggers you, and you, for whatever the topic may be, right? And then you go about the rest of your day having like frustration and stress with you. You might not stop to make the connection like, oh man, I've been like feeling that since that day, but it happens often. We're carrying these things with us. So it's important for us to be aware of what we're letting in. But so the more I started to become aware of that, and to become aware that people don't want to let go, that's when I felt even more like encouraged, like no, you guys telling me to stay is just encouraging me to leave even more, like because the reality is, and we're going to talk about this, there are better platforms that already exist. And what I mean by better is decentralized, they don't track you, they don't trace you, they don't sell your data, and also free, and that they have everything that you've come to expect to, groups, pages, videos, all the all that kind of stuff. So the other thing about Facebook and this kind of funneling of the internet, in some places, like say for example, one that I know that I've looked at a lot is India. So in India, obviously there's quite a bit of poverty. Not every single person has access to like the internet as we understand it, right? But they might have a smartphone and the only app they have on there is Facebook. So they are literally being funneled in through that, right? So now let's go back to the censorship, where Facebook starts censoring things that are inauthentic or that they don't agree with, whatever the topic may be, and again, this could range from controversial things to vaccines to flat earth to whatever. Like, I don't care. I think people should have access to it. Like, you should be able to use your own discerning mind to think for yourself. And in my view, these tech companies who are closely aligned with the governments are saying that they know what's best for us. They're trying to be mommy and daddy, like, let's protect their virgin ears and eyes. They can't think for themselves, right? I think it's a very dangerous place that we're moving into, right? So when you have that funnel where your only access to the internet is through Facebook or through Instagram, and then we also know that these companies are censoring and creating their own version of reality, and then add to that, if you're not aware that when you search through Google, you're getting a very limited scope of what's actually available out there on the World Wide Web, like the actual internet as we know it. And this is because there's two reasons. For one, if you're on your phone and you're constantly like logged into Google, so when you're using Google Maps or Google accounts or whatever, everything you search, everywhere you go, they're gathering that data and they're creating a profile on you. And in some ways, it's supposed to be super convenient, right? They know that you like stopping at your favorite coffee shop every morning, so when there's an ad for that, they're going to show you, hey, your favorite coffee's on sale, right? You're like, cool, wow, that's so convenient. I wouldn't have known about that. But the other side is that it affects the way you search. So they are feeding you search results based on everything else that you've already looked up, based on all the interactions you had, and what the AI, the artificial intelligence, and the algorithm thinks that you should see. And we also know that there has been a coordinated effort over the past few months, Facebook, Amazon, YouTube, Google, to start eliminating information that, again, is like dangerous or that they view. But again, I think that we as free, powerful, beautiful people have the capability within ourselves to discern and to think for ourselves. And we're not all going to come to the same conclusions, and I think that's important. When we remove dialogue, when we remove the ability for people to actually find information, we're getting to a place where only the authorities can tell us what's real. You know, anybody ever read 1984? Winston's job in that book was to go back and sanitize all the newspapers. So one day we're at war with East Asia, the next day we're in peace with them. So he goes back to make sure that all the papers reflect that we've always been at peace with them. There was never any other way. We're getting to a place like that where there are these filter bubbles that exist. There's some good TED Talks that talk about this, and I did a video a couple weeks ago called Algorithms Are Already Controlling Our Lives, and it was based on this paper that I found. These two professors, I can't recall what university they're at, but these two professors basically showed that a number of examples of how algorithms are already affecting our decision making. You know, and it's as simple as Google Maps again. So let's talk about the positives. When you're using Google Maps and you're going from point A to point B, you don't know that there's a wreck over there, right? So if you didn't have Google Maps on, like say old school, back before, anybody drove before Google Maps? Anybody remember that? Yeah, I do. You would either just like, I know my neighborhood like the back of my hand because I didn't grow up like using Google Maps, but I see my friends who are dependent on it and they don't know like how to get around their own neighborhood, you know, because they just like, oh, I can always ask Google, right? But so the positive is Google will tell you there's a wreck on your way, take this alternative route, you're not going to be late to work, you might even save some time. You're like, cool, that's really awesome. And as this goes further and further and we start integrating more AI and more algorithms, we're going to get to a point where, since we're all plugged in, they might say, hey, your buddy who you haven't seen in 5 years that you've been wanting to run into is at your favorite coffee shop. Make a detour, you'll see him, and you can still get to work on time. So there'll start to be these clever plugins that are gonna be so convenient, so convenient and helpful for us. But again, after a certain time, we stop making our own decisions, and we are no longer in charge. And I think that again is getting to a very dangerous point. Is anybody familiar with social credit scores in China, or has anybody seen I've never seen Black Mirror, but that's a reality already. That's taking place in China right now. 2 million people, the number actually might be higher, but I think it's 2 to 3 million Chinese citizens were denied the right to fly out of their own country last year because their social credit score was not high enough. And this is something that we're already seeing. Facebook already rates users on their trustworthiness. This is kind of a back-end thing. But what do you think is going to happen as these companies become further integrated with the governments and this trust score becomes public? There are some folks who I think are a bit misguided who think that the answers to fighting fake news and censorship is to turn Facebook and Amazon and these companies into public utilities, to make them part of the government. I think that would be a bad move, if only for the reason that, when you combine, say, everything the NSA has on us with everything you've told Facebook that you like and everything you've ever searched on Google, you can, they're at the point now where they can predict relationships before we are even aware. You go out to they see that you're at the same event with somebody, the next day you guys become Facebook friends, you start liking each other's stuff. The algorithm can predict when you are going to start becoming a partner with or engaging with people. So the human psychology is down. I mean, they have it down so perfectly in ways that we can't even imagine. And now there are companies who are just selling this information. That's why Cambridge Analytica was such a big thing, because these companies now know so much about us. They know how to trigger you to sway you one way, to sway a whole election if they want to, right? So I think it's important for us to recognize not only what we're voluntarily handing over, because a lot of times we're giving this information. It's not like they're holding a gun to us and saying like, hey, tell us what you like, tell us what you feel, the other thing, selfies, face prints. This is called your face print. I don't know if you guys are aware, by 2021, in order to fly in the United States, you're going to have to submit to facial recognition scanning. It's going to become the norm, some form of biometrics, either a thumb print or a facial face print. And so we're getting to this really dangerous place of integration of everything we've given the social media companies, everything we've given the search engines, everything the government already has on us, our face print. And I do believe that the United States is going to adopt a social credit score fairly soon. One of the other, while we're kind of on tech right now, one of the other issues that I've been focusing a lot back in Houston is 5G and the implications, I guess the kind of more negative implications of 5G and of the Internet of Things. Are you guys familiar with these terms? If not, I'll break them down a little further. Okay, so 5G basically just means like the 5th generation of cellular technology. And what the Internet of Things is, right now we have your smartphone and we have laptops and those things, but now we're getting to smart houses, smart fridge, smart everything, right? So we're going to have tens and thousands of sensors around us that are both either microphones but also gathering data points. And in order for us to go from where we are now, 4G, 4th generation of cellular technology, to this future world that people want autonomous vehicles, robot assistants, driverless cars, all these, again, convenient, helpful things. In order for that to happen, in order for us to move towards the Internet of Things, 5G has to be rolled out. And it's currently being rolled out in the United States by Verizon, Sprint, and other companies. And I've been doing a lot of work to fight it in Houston and to raise awareness on this. And so what it involves is 5G works on millimeter waves, and without, again, getting too deep into it, essentially these waves are different than what you're dealing with your phones right now because these waves only travel 200 to 300, up to 500 feet. What that means is they're going to have to install towers and small cells, which are about the size of a backpack or refrigerator, every 500 feet in order to have this constant, communication of devices, so that when you walk, you have constant streaming technology. So, along with that 5G, and along with the Internet of Things and all the great things that are promised with it, I do believe that is going to be the beginning of rolling out the social credit score in the United States, because a lot of these new technologies, in order for them to work, you have to have, like I said, you can't really have 5G if when I walk out into the woods, all of a sudden I lose signal. For it to work, it has to be everywhere, right? So just look up 5G a little bit more. If you search my name in 5G, you'll see a video I did a couple months ago. For one reason or another, it went viral. We've got about 800,000 views on this video, and it's helped reach a lot of people from around the country, people who are asking these questions. So when I'm looking at the scope of things, and again, as a journalist, my work, I focus on indigenous struggles, a lot of trying to raise awareness about indigenous issues in South America, Latin America, as well as stuff going in the U.S. But also surveillance technology has been something that I've just focused on intently, because when you look at the scope of history, and you look at, say, for example, the American Revolution, one of the things that they fought about is that the British king was now quartering soldiers into Americans' houses, which meant that you had no right to privacy, right? If the soldier wanted to come in, he could just sit in your house, he could go through whatever you wanted. You did not have the freedom of privacy. And history shows that once you lose privacy, and also freedom of the press, it becomes very difficult to gain that back. Because if the government or military or whatever force believes they have the right into your home whenever they want, I mean, you don't have the right to organize. You start to lose the right to think, to maybe have controversial opinions. But we're also now at a time where we're putting the technology in ourselves. Who has Alexa? Who has Echo? Who has all those things, right? You can find dozens of stories. There was one that just came out last week. It was a new report that thousands of Amazon employees have access to people's recordings, because those things, the Samsung TV, the smart TVs, they're recording constantly. And they say it's just to gather, they want to hear what your conversation's about, so they can feed you more convenient ads, right? So in one way, let's say at best, they're just trying to market you. At worst, they're listening to everything we're doing, right? And we're back to the 1984. What did Winston talk about? He said there was a telescreen in every room, and you never knew if it was listening or watching. You had to go into a little cubbyhole to smoke a cigarette or whatever, right? So again, in a lot of ways, we're voluntarily giving up this privacy, because some would say we're coming to an age where privacy is a relic of the past. I think that's a dangerous way to think. I think we should move towards more transparency, but in a voluntary fashion. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to share things with social media and with the world, that should be your choice, as opposed to that being taken from you and then shared with whoever and then used to sell you more things, right? One other point I want to make that's been coming up to me recently is, and kind of in line with this, is what I also realize is when it comes to the kind of emerging influencer culture, which is, I think, more prevalent on Instagram, it's kind of interesting how, so I read this article talking about how some of these companies, they'll look for what they call micro-influencers. So a micro-influencer is somebody who has like 10,000 followers or less, nothing too major, but already at that level, you're valuable to a company. So they might start reaching out to you like, hey, you got 10,000 followers, we got this t-shirt, you want to wear it, and so you start seeing more people placing ads and things like that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like, I traded and bartered with somebody to get this for free to wear it on stage sometimes. That's pretty cool. But like, there's a difference between that, I think, and these big corporations realizing that they don't have to sell us ads anymore. They'll just get us to sell it to each other. So you build up a social media following, and they'll start giving you ads and stuff that you will then turn around and sell to your friends, and they don't even have to do the difficult work anymore. They make us become the billboards for each other. So I just think that's important to think about. So we've talked about I was mentioning social media censorship and how my work has largely been dependent on that over the years, and now we're rethinking this. And because again, I'll place the blame on our shoulders to some extent. We made the mistake of becoming dependent on these platforms to spread information, because I mean, in the beginning, social media tools were amazing, like a great way to reach people. And you have to think about this: YouTube only came out in 2008, so we're only a decade into this, like seeing how it shaped. But think about what has happened in the last 10 years, how much the world has changed because of social media and because of things like YouTube, Twitter, Amazon, all these things, right? So we really are in a new era, and already we're seeing that now that they've got everybody on these platforms, they're closing, the hatch now, and they're, nope, that's not allowed, that's not allowed, this is gonna. And the other thing is, so if you ever do a search, Google search engine, I was talking about when you search on Google and how each of us will get different results. We could like try it right now if you want. If you've got service right now, search war in Yemen, for example, something like that. Everybody with different Google accounts, you will all get different results based on different things. And not only that, they're also creating a filter bubble, because studies have shown that the average person does not go past the first page. We're just creatures of habit. We're not actually doing real research. You think you're doing research if you're doing a Google search, but unless you've gotten to page 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and then compare that to an alternative search engine, DuckDuckGo.com is an alternative search engine that doesn't track you or trace you. Unless you're actually doing that work, you're only seeing what they want you to see. And this is a part of the problem. So people are out there thinking that they're getting a fully informed view of what's going on in the world, but in reality, they're getting what this company has sanitized and has approved. And when you start to understand the very close relationships that Google has with the intelligence agencies of the United States, specifically the CIA, the U.S. government, Facebook as well. One of the things that happened prior to that Facebook purge that I mentioned, where hundreds of Facebook pages were deleted, and it happened multiple times. We saw it happen over the summer, where hundreds of health pages were deleted, then hundreds of kind of police brutality pages, anti-war pages. So it's happened in different chapters. We've seen them they announced they deleted a whole nother page, right? So before that, though, back in May of last year, Facebook announced that in order to fight fake news, they were partnering with the Atlantic Council. And so we're like, okay, who the hell is the Atlantic Council? Let's start looking into this organization. And we start doing the research. The Atlantic Council is funded by the U.S. military. The Atlantic Council is funded by the Department of Defense. The Atlantic Council has partnerships with governments all around the world. These are people who stand to, lose from the information we're sharing by educating people and raising awareness, right? So they have a direct conflict of interest. So that partnership happened in May, and like I said, by October, our pages are gone. And I don't think it's a conspiracy or a coincidence at all. I mean, they've actively acknowledged that this is why they were working with them, to help them, fight fake news and combat inauthentic content. So we're living in that world now where the tools that have become widely available, even to the point that Google it has become part of our lexicon. That when I say that, there's no what do you mean? I don't understand what that means. We know when I say Google something, you understand what I mean. We don't even say search something anymore. It's just Google it, right? So I've, in the interest of conscious language, tried to pull that back and even catch myself sometimes hey, telling somebody to Google it, wait, hold on, it's not as, it doesn't roll off the tongue the same, but DuckDuckGo it. And there are others, there's Start Page, there's a few others out there that once you dig in and find are more valuable for the reasons I said. They don't track you, they don't trace you. There's alternative browsers, there's alternative emails. The email that I use is called ProtonMail, protonmail.com. It's a encrypted email application that's based in Switzerland. Their servers are there, so you can't. The U.S. government's not going to be able to come get their servers because they're neutral, so they can't come just. Like companies that are based in the United States, say for example Skype, Microsoft, these companies. If the cops or the government wants to get your information, history's already shown these companies will comply. They don't stand up for a right and say, hey, no, this is one of my customers and you need to show me a warrant. They just give your data over. And the same thing with Facebook. So we're using tools that have shown that they do not respect our values, they do not respect our privacy and our principles. So there's alternative email accounts, there's alternative search engines. For those who are kind of dependent on Docs, Google Docs, those kind of tools, there's a website called Zoho, zoho.com, Z-O-H-O. Docs, spreadsheets, documents, everything that you have when it comes to that Google thing, but again, without tracking and tracing your information. They also have email accounts and that sort of thing. And then when it comes to social media tools, there's several platforms that I use, and I'm not paid by any of these people. I just want to make that clear. These are just platforms I use and that I've embraced because I find more value in them, right? So one of the ones that I use fairly regularly is called Steemit, and I don't think any of these are perfect by any means as well, I'll say that. And I will also acknowledge that when you go from Facebook to where you've got all your friends and family, and then you go join a new social media account, you feel like you're in a ghost town because you haven't made the same. You know, think of the years it took you to build up those connections and those groups and follow those pages and make those friends and all that. And when you're the only one joining while the rest of your friends are staying over there, I've had some folks who come join and they're like, yeah, man, I tried it, but nobody's there. So a week later, they're back on Facebook. But again, I think that, like I was saying earlier, where my audience was telling me, please stay on Facebook, please stay on Facebook. Well, if I hadn't embraced and chose to leave, then none of these other folks that I've been encouraging to would have ever heard of these platforms. You know, I can't force them to use them, but I can at least give them the tools to be aware that there are other platforms. So, well, yeah, I mean, people are waiting for MySpace to have a re-emergence, but I don't know if that's happening. They can't get their shit together. They just lost everybody's music. Anybody had music saved on MySpace? I had an old band on there. It's gone. Never gonna see it again. But so, Steemit.com is a blockchain-based social media platform. It's kind of more similar to like Medium. It's mainly for blogging, I'll say. So it's like, it's not set up in the same way that you're used to with Facebook. But in addition to, so you have the Steemit blockchain, and on top of that, people have built what are called dApps, decentralized apps on top of it. So one of them is called DTube, just like what it sounds, decentralized YouTube. You can load videos up just the same way. You can watch videos. And the cool thing is, as this is growing, one of the things I've recognized is that for some reason, it's not growing as quick in the US as it is in Africa, as it is in other places where they truly need like decentralized tools. Because the cool thing about Steemit is you can actually earn currency through the platform, what they call Steem dollars, right? So for every like upvote, you know, and share and things like that, you'll get like a penny here and there. And there's a whole, you know, we could talk about that all day. There's like a whole reputation system where the more you use it, the more interactive, the more your reputation becomes worth. So when I come give you a thumbs up, you get 8 cents as opposed to like half a cent from somebody brand new, right? And so folks who are using the internet, again, I've seen a lot of people in Nigeria and other countries who are just out there taking pictures or videos or whatever their, you know, their thing is, and they're earning like a couple pennies. That starts to add up and build up, and so they're starting to become entrepreneurs just through this decentralized platform. So the cool thing about Steemit is these dApps that have been built on top of it. So DTube.video is just like it sounds. It's a video watching platform, and the more people have joined, you'll find travel videos now. Like in the beginning, it was mainly kind of like crypto savvy people because it was brand new, but again, the more people that join, the more the content grows, and you're not going to just find one type of content. So now you've got travel videos, you've got recipes, you've got yoga videos, and all kinds of stuff. It's really growing. And then there's another dApp that's on top of that called Steepshot, S-T-E-E-P Shot, and it's the decentralized Instagram. Same thing, you post pictures, you can get rewarded for your pictures. And like I said, I'm not promising anybody's going to become like rich off of it because it takes time to kind of build that up. But Steepshot, DTube. Another one that I really appreciate is DSound, which is it's a decentralized SoundCloud. Same thing, like, so people out there loading their music up, and again, you don't necessarily have to take the route that I did as far as abandoning the other platforms, but add them into your, you know, your kind of repertoire of platforms that you're checking out and using, and maybe encourage your friends, because I do think this is where we're going to get to talking about the holistic stuff. That unless we start thinking truly holistically and thinking about how to align our thoughts, words, and our actions, and our principles with our actions, then we're never going to get to the goal, right? Because we can talk all day, we can bitch about Facebook all day on Facebook, but you can kind of see the contradiction there, right? You can kind of say, like, oh, I hate this platform, why are they censoring me, while I'm like hanging out and giving them, because just you being there is giving them money. Just the act of being on the platform and using it, you know, and I used it for 10 years, got hundreds of thousands of likes, and never got a dime. All of a sudden I joined like Steemit, and like, oh wow, I'm getting a few bucks for some of my posts. Like, that's cool, and that helps out every now and then to pull some money out of there, or just to keep it in there as a digital currency that I can trade with other people. So DSound, Steepshot, DTube, and there's a few others that have been built, but those are the ones I'm most familiar. And then one that's probably a little bit more easy to use, that you don't have to have any knowledge of blockchain, is called Minds.com. M-I-N-D-S, Minds.com, and this is much, much closer to what you're used to seeing with Facebook. They are built on a blockchain. They have an internal token system, but again, you don't really have to know anything about how cryptocurrency works or blockchain works to use it. They have pages, they have groups, they have videos and all that stuff. So you can buy a token. I think the tokens are worth like 15 cents right now. So say you're following the Conscious Resistance on Minds, and you like a video I put out. So you go buy $1 worth of tokens, and then you can send those tokens to me, and even though they're only worth 15 cents USD out here, within the ecosystem, each of those tokens is worth 1,000 views. So then I can take one of my favorite posts, or you can, you know, do it if you're like, hey, I love this post, I want to boost it. You click boost, and you send 5 tokens to that, and then the system makes sure that it gets seen by 5,000 people. It gets put in front of 5,000 accounts. So it's a way for us to boost our work in there. And they received like a $6 million investment last year from, anybody ever heard of Overstock.com, the online shopping website? So the guy who founded that, Patrick Byrne, he's really kind of embraced crypto, and he also wants to take down Facebook. He's kind of made it his personal mission. So he invested $6 million to start last year in Minds. So they're starting to get attention, and even to the point that if you go, so for example, go to your Facebook account and try to say, hey guys, join me on Minds.com, and you're going to get a little pop-up that doesn't let you post Minds. They've literally blocked the Minds.com link on Facebook because they're afraid of the competition. It usually makes you do some security features like, are you sure you want to post this link? It looks like it's from a sketchy website or something like that, and it's just another way to discourage people from using the platform. But one thing I will say is, one thing that we as a community and the activists and journalists that I kind of work with that we would never have with Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, is that Bill, I can't remember his last name, Bill is one of the co-founders of Minds, and I had a Skype call with him last week. Like, he's actively wants to know how he can make the platform better. Like, for example, they don't have scheduling yet, and so anybody who runs a Facebook page or has used a page knows how important to be able to schedule is, so you don't have to sit there all day and remember every hour to post something new. And for us as journalists constantly producing new content, we want to schedule out a full day of posts, right? They don't have that feature yet. They're working on it now. He's actively willing to listen. We can get on the phone with him and be like, hey, Bill, we need, longer videos. Right now, the uploads are limited to like 15-minute videos. And so he's engaging with us. He wants us to embrace the platform, and we're working on some new partnerships to try to get the independent media and Minds to collaborate together. But he also doesn't want it to just be an activist platform. He wants it to be something that everybody can embrace and use. So yeah, my whole point with kind of giving the spiel on that is that there are better platforms already that exist. Minds, Steemit, and there's others out there, but these are the main ones that I've kind of concentrated my energy on. The only traditional platform that I'm still currently using for the moment is YouTube, and that's mainly because in the last 6 months, my channel has tripled in growth once I started making documentaries that kind of got a lot more attention. So I decided to listen to my audience in one area. They said, please stay on YouTube for the moment. So I'm doing that, but my goal is in the long term to still get them to, like, hey, I need more of you to follow in these other accounts. And there's also one called BitChute.com that's all about videos. So these platforms exist. Now, we were just talking about censorship and how Facebook and these other platforms are censored. These other platforms are not censored. So the stuff that you won't find on Facebook, the stuff that's been taken down off YouTube, that's been taken down off wherever because it's been censored, is still active on these other platforms. And that is something I think is really beautiful. And it probably will eventually set up court cases in the future because if you understand a blockchain, it's supposed to be immutable where it can't be deleted. So if I upload a video to that, like, it's there. You know what I mean? Like, you can come to me and say, hey, like, take that down, but even the owners can't take it down. Like, it's there. So I think eventually we'll probably see some court cases of like, how does that, they're going to be like, hey, we don't want that on there. Two examples of censorship that I'll give, and then we're going to focus on the holistic aspect of this. The New Zealand shooting that recently took place, right? So I don't think any average person really wants to watch that video, because I don't know if you guys are aware, but the dude live streamed himself going to the mosque and shooting a bunch of people. He live streamed it on Facebook, and then Facebook took it down, and then folks uploaded it to YouTube. YouTube took it down. It was getting taken down very quickly everywhere you could find. It's still available online though. It was even it was kind of controversial because people did load it up on Steemit, and you can't take things off Steemit, but you can downvote it, and it got downvoted by a lot of people in the community. So it's like it's still there, but it's kind of buried a little bit, right? And as a journalist, and I think also as just a skeptical person, I had an interest in seeing the video for myself. And I'll tell you this, guys, like, the video is a grainy live stream Facebook video. If you've ever seen a Facebook video, you see more gory things on like the latest episode of Game of Thrones, like, than anything, and it's a big difference because one's, fiction and one's reality. You see this guy going in and shooting a bunch of people, but you don't see anything, you can't see anything clearly, is basically what I'll say. But for one reason or another, as soon as this happened, the New Zealand government said that anybody in possession of that video or in possession of the guy's manifesto would face 10 years in prison. If you shared the video with somebody, you'd face 14 years in prison. To the point that even websites and people who aren't in New Zealand have started to get letters from the New Zealand government, like, demanding they take it down, even though they don't really have any authority. They're like, take down this video. And so it's created this whole conversation around where, again, people are asking these social media sites, like, stop the spread of hate content. And I think that we get to a dangerous area where we start letting these authorities decide what we should have access to and what we shouldn't. And whether, for whatever reason, whether you want to study a video like that for journalistic purposes or just for whatever, I think you should have that freedom. I'm totally, again, the talk is called The Importance of Censorship-Free Conscious Media. So I don't believe in censorship to any degree. And the other reality is that has anybody heard of LiveLeak.com? It's another video site that's been around forever. I mean, you can find people getting beheaded on LiveLeak. You can find like people's testicles getting stomped on, all kinds of disturbing shit that is way more disturbing than the New Zealand video, but nobody's calling to take that stuff down, right? So what it does is creates conspiracies around it. Of course, people are like, well, why don't they want us to see the video? Why are they taking it down? Why are they hiding it? And so whether that's justified or not, it just creates this whole industry of people asking questions and digging and wanting to know why. So they essentially create a black market for these banned videos, right? Another area of censorship that I think is relevant to right now, Thursday morning when I was leaving Houston, I saw the news that the UK authorities had just arrested Julian Assange of WikiLeaks after years and years of trying to get him, and now they're planning to extradite him to the US for he's going to stand trial for essentially for hosting documents. He didn't leak anything. He didn't hack anything. His website and his platform that he worked with just hosted documents. So Chelsea Manning leaked the Afghan war logs, which showed a lot of people the truth about the Afghan war and showed U.S. soldiers shooting innocent people from helicopters. We would never know about that truth. We would never have that video if she didn't leak that. And she already did her time, and now they've recently held her again. They've got her in solitary confinement. It's a whole mess. My point is, again, now Julian Assange is going to face a trial when essentially what it comes down to is he's a publisher of data. He's a journalist in another form. So no matter which angle we look at it, journalism, free thought, free thinking is under attack in the United States and really globally. And as I said, I do think that as we move further towards 5G and the Internet of Things, that we will see calls for a social credit score. And I want to elaborate a little bit further on the social credit score. What it involves and what Black Mirror, I still haven't watched the episode, even though every time I talk about this, people are like, oh, Black Mirror.
There's one in Orville as well.
Orville? Okay. So I need to watch those shows, but I mean, the funny thing is I kind of don't because it's already happening in real life. I feel like, yeah, I don't really need to watch a show to tell me what's happening in another country. But, so, as I said, millions of Chinese citizens denied the right to fly out of their own country because their social credit score was too low. Now, let's imagine if tomorrow the United States government announced that they were going to turn Facebook into a public utility, and all that data that they have on us now, it was going to be involved in creating a trustworthy score for each of us. We'd be rated, 1 to 100 or whatever, right? And how do you think somebody like me, who spent the last decade, raising awareness of these kinds of things, being arrested for civil disobedience, confronting politicians, doing these kinds of things, I imagine my score would probably be pretty freaking low. And then all of my friends, their scores would start to go down as well, because the way it works is just by associating with other antisocial people, as they call it in China, your score goes down. And your score goes down, so next time you come up for that, you want to get that bank loan, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, your scores, your social credit score, not just your credit score, your social credit score is too low. You're hanging out with unsavory people. You want to go, you want to buy a car and they just won't give you a loan. There's all kinds of ways that this is what was known as social engineering. They start to use these tools and the fear of being, guilty by association to control people's behavior. Because after a while, you might start to think like, yeah, man, I do love you, but I got to make sure I can go visit my family, and if I keep hanging out with you, I'm not going to be able to fly. And then also think about in terms of people start questioning, should I post this on Facebook? Should I post this video? Like, I don't know, my score is going to suffer. I might not be able to go visit my friends. Like, I might not, I imagine we'd lose a whole lot of activists if the social credit score said, oh, you no longer have access to dispensaries. So all of a sudden people would stop being activists. Like, whoa, man, I got to have my weed. Sorry, dude, I understand the war's bad, but man, if I talk about it, I'm not going to have my weed. So I just got to be quiet. This is a realistic concern. It's already taking place in China, and the global race to 5G, as the big telecoms, big wireless are calling it, is taking place right now. And there's kind of an ongoing Cold War between China and the US. They're both in a race to embrace 5G, to get it installed in their countries as quick as possible. And I'm kind of focusing on the privacy aspects, but there are also a host of other health concerns in relation to 5G as well that we're not even really going to get into today because it's another can of worms. But if you are interested, I have a whole playlist on my YouTube channel about the health and privacy concerns, interviewing experts from the ACLU, researchers from Washington State University and others. But, so as we move towards 5G and the Internet of Things, we are going to get a social credit score. And in my eyes, all indications, it seems an inevitability. And mostly because most people aren't even aware that this is taking place, that this is happening right in front of them. And I just wanted to, take a moment to kind of present the question to you guys of how would that change your behavior? Would you choose to be less vocal about the things you care about? Would you choose to skip out on a protest if it meant that you lose a couple of points in your social credit score? If it meant that you lose the right to fly, or to, who knows where they could take it. Eventually, maybe it's like, because if you read the Chinese government's papers, what they in their own words, they literally have said, those who are, I can't remember the phrase they use, but basically, like, if you're a good citizen, you will have all the privileges and all the benefits of, the Chinese economy, and those who are antisocial will not be able to move a single foot. Like, that's what they want it to get, to where you can't even leave your house because you've lost the privilege of that. And they're not there yet. They're testing it out in parts of the country, and the whole thing's supposed to go live by 2020, like nationwide. And it's absolutely coming to the United States. So I'm not here to be a doomsayer, but again, I think that the more that we embrace these technologies that I've been describing and talking about, the ones that don't align with our principles and values, then the easier we make for these systems to become normalized, right? If we start to say, you know what, this doesn't align with my values and principles, so I'm going to opt out of that. I'm going to actively opt out of it. I'm going to tell my friends that there are better platforms. I'm going to use different search engines. I'm going to use different social media networks. Or I'm just going to, realize that life still happens without those things. Life is still going on, and you might end up a lot less stressed out. I know I found myself less stressed out. But, so what I'm describing here is taking a holistic perspective. And so, as I said, I call my work holistic activism or holistic anarchism. And holistic and anarchism are both two words that I find are probably the most misunderstood, overused, and misused words about. And especially in this community, and not Lucidity specifically, but spiritual conscious community, the word holistic is thrown around quite frequently. You have everything from holistic gardening to holistic sex to holistic cat food to whatever. I mean, you name it, there's something that has holistic next to it. But the term has a meaning, and it has a real definition, and words do matter, and understanding them when you use them is important. So the term holistic comes from the philosophy of holism. And holism, H-O-L-I-S-M, holism is the philosophy of studying whatever your subject is, studying all the pieces together as one unit, as opposed to breaking them down into individual components. And it fundamentally changes the way you understand a subject. So, for example, holistic ecology is about studying all the environment, all the systems of the earth, animals, plant, humans, together as one system, as opposed to breaking them down individually. And again, it changes the way you see it. Holistic psychology is about studying the entire mind as opposed to breaking down individual components. Holistic medicine, I think most of us understand, is about studying the whole body and finding the root, not just treating the symptom, right? So with that in mind, when I talk about holistic activism, it's about taking that perspective, that full, whole scope picture into your activism. So how do we define activism? To some folks, activism is holding a sign, screaming and shouting on the streets, things like that. I think that's a part of activism, but it's also much, much more than that, at least in my perspective. My definition of activism is a bit more broad. I tend to think that activism is a way of life. And also I think that all of us are activists, whether we choose to be or not. Some of us just choose to embrace it, right? You guys heard that phrase that activism is the rent I pay for being on this planet. That's kind of the philosophy that I embrace. I feel like just called to do it. But I also don't like look down on anybody who chooses different paths. But I do think that we are all activists in different forms. Activism and the evolution, it's in the day-to-day. It's not just in the fights on the streets with the cops or with the politicians, or calling your congressman or doing those sort of political things. It's in your day-to-day actions. It's the way you live your life. So when you have a conversation, you engage with somebody, are you leaving them with more knowledge and more of a thirst to empower themselves and empower the world, or are you leaving them in a state of fear, anger, despair, or just apathy? So when I look at that, and when you look at typical activism, what I think most people associate with is this very reactive thing, right? Okay, well, there's a pipeline over here, so let's go race over there and fight that. Oh, they're doing this, let's race over here and do this. It's just the other side is controlling the game and dictating where we go, where we spend our resources and energy, just chasing it, right? It's very reactive. So I think that when we embrace the holistic message and combine it with activism, we get a whole different view of things. So let me give you two examples of this, of a traditional form of activism and what it would look like from a holistic perspective. I mentioned the March Against Monsanto earlier, right? So March Against Monsanto started in 2012, and they had, I think the first year was, as with most movements, was the biggest year. 500 marches globally, all around the world, just going out there, raising awareness about the dying bees, or pesticides, or Monsanto's shady practices, or GMOs, or whatever, right? People were out there. And we were involved, the Houston Freethinkers, we worked with March Against Monsanto Houston, and we said, all right, after you guys go do the march, because in Houston, any major march always happens at the same intersection. It's by like this big fancy mall where people are going to spend a lot of money, and they couldn't give a damn about some activists marching around in circles, but that's where everybody does it, right? So we march around for 3 hours in circles while the cops, like, I think it's very ineffective. But either way, it's like, okay, after we do that, how about we go to the local community farm? It used to be called the Last Organic Outpost. It was this beautiful permaculture farm in the poorest neighborhood of Houston. We said, okay, after we march for a few hours, let's go to the farm and host a Skillshare and show people how to grow their own food, right? That's the goal, right? I mean, that's what we're working towards, at least for me it was. And it wouldn't surprise you that we had 400 people show up at the march and less than a handful show up at the garden. Because they're focused on that reactive form of activism. And I'm not downing that at all, because I do know that that day particularly there was a lot of new activists who've never been out, because when it's a new cause like that, you're getting like soccer moms and all kinds of people who wouldn't be at a typical protest, and it feels good the first time you hit the streets and you're like out there expressing your voice. That can be a powerful, empowering thing, but if that's where it stops, then I don't think we're seeing the full picture. So another kind of example of that, after they're done marching and celebrating and they decide not to go to the garden, they all go out for a celebratory lunch and they sit down and they're eating their GMO corn chips and just okay, like there's a disconnect, right? Another example of a movement that kind of has that disconnect. Around the same time period, there was these national rallies and marches taking place at all the Federal Reserve banks. It was like National in the Fed Day or something like that. And same thing, there was some of those going on in Houston, and I saw some of the same symptoms. There was good activists and people spending their hard-earned money to like, hey, all right, let's rent out a stage, we're gonna get a sound system, we're gonna fly these activists from across the country, we're gonna put on this big event, and we're gonna build the stage, we're gonna be across from the Federal Reserve building, like, we're bringing you down, and all this. And again, getting that energy, it feels good to express yourself and let those frustrations out. And then somebody comes over to one of the tables and they're like, hey, I'd like to buy that In the Fed shirt, and they pull out a Federal Reserve note to pay with it. They're using the same currency of the very system that they're railing against and collaborating against. To me, that's not thinking holistically. If you're thinking about that specific problem holistically, then you would want to encourage people to use alternative currencies to get out of that system, as opposed to reinforcing it by participating in it in the same way. So that's what I consider to be reactive forms of activism. Now, again, taking in that holistic perspective, when you start to form your worldview, and at the top, right now I think some people think Trump's the top of the pyramid, other people have different names, right? You got the Trumps and the Clintons and the Monsantos or whatever, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, whoever you put in that place, right? And you start to research and you go out there and you rage on the streets, and you've got your worldview formed and you're pointing your fingers like, they're the problem, if we could just get rid of them or fix them, things would be better. That's that reactive form of activism. But most people stop there and they don't turn that finger back around and say, how am I contributing to that system, right? Like I said, if you're out there marching against Monsanto, but then you're supporting companies that are using Roundup, or you're buying GMO products, or whatever or you're supporting products that hurt the bees, then you're working against your own goals and your own ends. You're not thinking holistically. And the same thing, if you're against the Federal Reserve System and debt slavery and economic enslavement and all that, but you're still using the currency, which I'll admit is difficult to avoid, but if you're not actively trying to educate yourself and get past that, then you are not going to achieve the goal. So we see a big disconnect between goals, motivations, and actions, right? So that has been my main focus the last couple of years, is to try to get people to understand that we have to start thinking holistically, and again, coming from that definition of what it means, looking at the whole picture. So this image here was designed by my partner, and it's not just a cool looking thing, it actually has a purpose. Each of these vectors can represent like a different area of your life, for example. So you have like the economy, right? And this would be where you spend your money, like the purchasing power, vote with your dollar type of thing, as well as the type of currency you use. This could be your food, the type of food you eat, as well as what does that food involve. Like, does it have to travel 10,000 miles to get to you? What companies are you supporting, right? This could be your interpersonal relationships. I know a lot of folks who understand political philosophy like the back of their hand, or they understand permaculture like the back of their hand, but then maybe in their interpersonal relationships, they treat people like shit, or they treat themselves like shit, And to me, all of this is equally important to elevating ourselves, right? So you start to look at your life and understand and break it down in different areas, and to see where you might want to improve. And if you have a moment like that where you're like, yeah, I do have this vision of living a sustainable life and having off-grid community and all these beautiful things, but then you look at your daily habits and routine and you're like, but I haven't even DuckDuckGo'd what does a sustainable farm look like yet. I haven't even taken that first step. Well, then you're probably never going to get there. Unless it just magically lands in your lap one day, it probably won't happen, right? So I see that a lot. I see that they're not just activists, but us as human beings, there's often a disconnect between our motivations and our goals and what we're actually doing. So I put together a book last year. All my books are available for free to download on my website, theconsciousresistance.com. But I put out a book last year called The Holistic Self-Assessment, and it's a very simple, like 80-page book that is a workbook, and it's meant for you to kind of work through. And each chapter asks a question, and each chapter ends with a simple exercise. The first question is, who am I? Second, what are my principles? What are my goals? Or what are my habits? What are my goals? What are my relationships like? Are my habits and my relationships in line with those goals? And if not, if you realize, well, I want to promote this better world that's about truth and justice and freedom, but I'm still supporting companies, be that social media companies or whatever, that don't align with those goals, well, it's not for me or anybody else to judge. That might be a time for you to stop and say, okay, let me focus on that. Let me work on that. Okay, I can change my email server over. I can, start shopping more local. I can support these farmers markets. I can build a community garden. There's all kinds of different ways this could be applied, and it's going to look different to each of us because we're going to have different desires and needs and resources based on our individual paths and our communities. But that's the goal, is to start to identify these different areas and to see where there's a disconnect between goals, principles, and the actions that we're truly taking. So some of the, I mentioned the self-assessment, some of the main principles that I try to promote and to live by, and that I'm planning on launching or creating an intentional community in the next year and a half or so, or at least getting the groundwork laid down. I've been spending the last couple years, speaking at transformational festivals and visiting intentional communities and eco-villages and all the different names everybody gives their communities, trying to learn and gather ideas and just kind of research and development to lay the foundation for the community that I want to create. And in my third book, we describe this pyramid of what I think is the foundation for everything we've been kind of talking about. The self-assessment kind of helps with that, because once you take the self-assessment, you understand who you are as an individual. You understand what your principles are. Let me start there. When I say that word principles, I just feel free to shout. What comes to mind? Like, give a definition to that, because it's one of these words that's sort of abstract, where I think, when I say it, there's a message that's transmuted to you, but we can't always put it into words, and it's important for us to stop and do it. So what does a principle mean?
Integrity.
Moral code.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Where the rubber meets the road. Integrity. Okay, so I think that's where, so we're all kind of in the general area. We understand that, right? So the reason I put that question in there, what are my principles, are because I've found that while there are a lot of us with good intentions, how often do we actually stop to think, like, what are the principles that I'm referring to? Some people call it like first principles, right? Like, it's because it's the first thing you refer to when you make your daily actions. But, and I can say this is a very flawed person, that in some of my worst days, I've definitely hurt a lot of people and lived now, looking back, like, in ways that don't align with the principles in the world that I want to live in, just being a very deceptive, manipulative person in the past. Now, I try to understand the principles that I value and make every decision that I make refer back to that. So for me, I apply it to my diet. I'm a vegan, and so to me, it's like every decision that I refer back to is like the foundation. Do these actions, I'll tell you my principles and what I refer back to. So the first principle that I want to build this community on, that I try to live my life on, is sometimes known as the sovereignty of the individual. It basically just means self-ownership. That each of us are powerful, beautiful, free people who own our lives and own the fruits of our labor. And what that means, the implications of that, right, are that so am I, so are you, so are, each of us. And so if that's true, if you are powerful, free, beautiful, and you own yourself, then it is thereby wrong, immoral, unethical, impractical for me to use force, coercion, or violence against you to force you to live the way that I want, right? I might not like the way you dress, who you date, what you smoke, what you eat, whatever, but I have no right to come force you to do anything else, to hold a gun to your head, and I would even say to vote for a government to force you to do it either. I think that's equally immoral and wrong, which is why I consider myself an anarchist. But we can have dialogue, we can have conversation, we can agree to disagree, but ultimately it is wrong for me to use force against that other person. So I give each of you that respect from the foundation, from the very beginning, and I choose to apply that to all life. That's why it affects my diet. Again, doing that holistic thing, I'm like, well, if that's my foundation, well then I need to apply that to my food, I need to apply that to my interpersonal relationships, and also I apply it to the earth, which brings me to the other kind of side of the pyramid, which would be permaculture and sustainability, and bringing those in. Again, not being destructive and invasive to the planet, but trying to work in harmony and balance with it, right? So sovereignty of the individual, self-ownership, and this is commonly known as the golden rule. These are things that we've been taught since we were in kindergarten, but for some reason as we get older, and especially when we start talking about institutions like government, people seem to forget that, like, hey, it's wrong to use force or violence against somebody else. It's wrong to coerce people and get them to, and it's like we understand consent, but we don't always apply the idea of consent to government, right? Like, that's kind of why I have issues with democracy, because let's say that we hold a vote here and 3/4 of us all vote that you want to cook me as a sacrifice. Like, that's good, that's cool, that's good, because it was a democratic vote. to me, I think that's a dangerous territory. That's a whole other conversation. But I do think that there's still force implied in that. There's still violence involved in that. So, as powerful, beautiful, free people, I respect your right to organize your own affairs and to organize with other free people as you choose. And I also want to build a community based on permaculture that respects everyone's sovereignty. And then the third kind of side of the pyramid would be what I simply refer to as mindfulness. And obviously it's kind of a catch-all term for a lot of big ideas. Like I would include meditation in my practice, but there's a lot of different ways that I think we all practice mindfulness, right? So the community that I want to build and the desires that I have are based around being other people who want to embrace permaculture, who want to embrace mindfulness, and who respect the sovereignty of each other individual. And so I've started to host monthly conference calls with people who are interested in this. We had our first one last month. We'll be having another one this month. We had about 30 people join last month from all over the world, Germany, Australia, all over the US, Costa Rica. And it's basically just a way to say, hey, I've got money, this is my plan, or I've got land already, I need help, or I have none of those things, but this is my vision. And just to start that collaborative process. So if you guys are interested in all that, please say something. Yeah, and the other thing that really underpins like the basic necessity of all my work is the principle of the 7 generations. And I think that well, first of all, we're all indigenous. It's important for people to understand that. I think that this is lost in a lot of conversations. It doesn't really matter the color of your skin, your ethnicity, or where you come from. Like if you are a lighter complected person of European descent, there were indigenous shamans back in Europe too, but they're much further lost back in history than those of us here in Native America. But you have roots somewhere, right? So wherever you come from, I encourage you to find more about that, and define that, because we are all indigenous, and I think sometimes that gets lost. There's a lot of hostility in that, but since we're all indigenous to this planet in some form or another, we all depend on this planet. It's important for us to embrace the concept of the 7 generations, which does come from our indigenous communities. And this just means that when you're taking your daily actions, you think about the results of your actions, not just in this moment, not just tomorrow, but for the coming generation, for the generation after that, to the 7 then beyond, to the people that we will never meet. You understand that? Like, we have an opportunity, us, a little group here gathered in this larger festival, have an opportunity to take the concepts that I'm sharing and the ideas that I know are burgeoning in your minds, and take them home with us. I'm going back to Houston. You guys you're going to Germany. We're all going to different parts of the country and the world. We can be the seed to go take these ideas back to our community, and whatever ideas that you have, to really make the change. Because ultimately, as I said, if we don't take any actions, if we're not thinking holistically, well then let's just be real. This is all just a big party. It's just a big circle jerk to make us feel good, like we're the conscious crowd. We got things figured out, and they don't know what's going on. But if we don't produce something out of it, if we don't get any concrete, real, actual change in our individual lives and as a collective, then nothing will change. And that's just the bottom line. Nothing will change unless we start thinking holistically, start thinking about the impact of our actions, what systems we're supporting, be that social media, Monsanto, government, corporations, whatever. Do that self-assessment. Check it out online if you want, or just do it for yourself. Just look at your life and look at the relationships that are not in line with your values, because that's what it is ultimately. You have a relationship with your grocery store, you have a relationship with your partner, you have a relationship with the government, whether you want it or not, you have a relationship with the food and all these different things. Which relationships are not in line with your values and principles? And if you don't know what your values and principles are yet, then sit down and do some deep meditation, get to know yourself, and think about what don't you want to see in the world, and what do you know is wrong, and start with that foundation. It doesn't have to be super big. Just like I said, I think it's wrong to initiate force and violence. It's pretty basic. It's a good place to start. But think about those ideas, guys, and I think that's pretty much what I want to say. I want to give you guys, I don't have cards or anything like that, but if you want to email me, that's the main way I keep in touch. My email is intothe_light, all one word, intothe_light @protonmail.com. And as I said, Proton Mail is an encrypted email service based in Switzerland. I highly recommend checking it out. Intothe_light @protonmail.com. Whether you want to get plugged into the Intentional Community Conference call or any of the ideas I've said, I'm happy to communicate in that way. And yeah, please do check out some of the other alternative platforms. I think it's important for us as we're moving forward to try to take a stand and should try to be the principled people, because otherwise, if we don't do anything today, those coming 7 generations are going to have a whole lot more shit to deal with. But if we decide to be the proactive ones, to be the forward-thinking ones, we can lay the foundation for a totally different world. But it won't happen unless we make an effort. And finally, I just want to end the way that I always do, which is with a positive affirmation that I've used over the years when I was struggling with my depression and drugs and suicide and all that. And it's just, to me, positive affirmations are not just meant to be mindless mantras that you just kind of repeat over and over in the mirror until you block out the negative things, right? Like, feel the words. If they vibe with you, if they resonate with you, take it, and use it whenever you can. Well, I'll tell you one phrase that's been coming to me a lot that I've been using, and I'd like you guys to repeat after me if you feel inclined. This is useful, I think, in times when, in good times, tonight when you're dancing and celebrating how free you feel, or just you're having a good conversation, or maybe even this moment, and in the bad times when you're struggling so hard you have no idea how you're going to make it through. Just say this to yourself. This is what it's like to be alive. Say it with me if you will. This is what it's like to be alive. That's all a part of your journey towards enlightenment. Don't run away from the pain. Don't run away. Don't just seek out the good things, right? Because all of it is a part of that experience of being a human being. So yeah, remember that. This is what it's like to be alive. And then, as I said, this has been helpful for me over the years. And with this, I'll leave you guys. So let's take a deep breath. I am powerful. I am beautiful. I am free. Thank you, guys.